by popular demand. Joining me now is who else but the law firm. Neil Katyal is the former acting U.S. Solicitor General, and Andrew Weissmann is the former FBI General Counsel. And I'm so thrilled to have you here on set with me today, Neil. So there's so many different components of this week, and I want to dig into as many as possible. A judge granted Kenneth Chesebro's request for a speedy trial. Sidney Powell filed her own request. There are also reports that John Eastman is asking for the same thing. That means that a number of these co-defendants would be separated from Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. What does that mean for Trump's case?
Okay, so there's two January 6th cases. There's the Georgia one going on that you're talking about now, and then there's the federal one, which Jack Smith has asked for a trial to begin on January 2nd of 2024. With respect to this request from Ken Chesebro, who is one of the architects of the January 6th coup, he said, I want a trial right away on October 23rd. Fani Willis, the prosecutor, says, yeah, game on. The judge says, fine, game on. So what this means is that the first January 6th trial will happen. It will likely be
in Georgia,
and it will likely be just Mr. Chesebro or perhaps with Sidney Powell, who's also asked for a fast trial. But it won't likely involve Donald Trump or the other 16 defendants that are named in the indictment. But that means it's a signal this stuff is starting to happen. And if you're Donald Trump, you've got to be very worried.
So, Andrew, just to pick it up where Neil left it there, why should Donald Trump be worried? What does it mean for his case?
So I think there's the court of public opinion, and there's also the issue of just, the legal court. So just let's focus on the court of public opinion. As you mentioned, Jen, in your intro, I mean, what Donald Trump is trying to do is litigate this in the court of public opinion and just spin facts to say this election was stolen. As Neil pointed out, that is very soon going to be in a forum that he cannot control, and he won't even be a defendant in that courtroom. So there will be facts and law that is going to be going on at the end of October in Georgia. And there actually is going to be a hearing tomorrow with respect to Mark Meadows, where again, facts and law will be presented, and Donald Trump will not be there to spin his version. So I think just from both from sort of what's going to go on in court, but also his whole play, which is to try this in a place where he can just make up the facts and the law that he wants, that is going to be really hard for him going forward, because you have these divergent defendants wanting to get into court sooner.
So, Neil, Andrew referenced this Mark Meadows trial. There's a lot happening tomorrow, actually. Yeah. So let's start with the Mark Meadows trial. He wants to move the venue from the state venue to a federal court. What are you watching for in this trial, and what happens exactly if any of these co-defendants who are asking for that are successful?
Yeah, so there's a really old law of Congress that says if you're a federal officer performing a federal function and you have a federal defense, if you've been indicted in state court, you can move that to federal court. It still means the state prosecutors control it all. So, for example, if Donald Trump wins in 24 or some other Republican, he can't terminate the state prosecution. But it does change things. So most importantly, and this is, I think, what Trump cares about the most, there are cameras in Georgia state courtrooms. There are not cameras in the federal system.
Do you think what Mark Meadows cares about, too?
Oh, absolutely. I think they all care about, they want this trial. They do not want the American public to see this trial. They are scared like vampires of sunlight here. And so I think that's part of it. Part of it is also to try and manipulate who's on the jury and things like that. So I don't think this removal motion that Meadows has filed is going to be successful, because it does require you to be performing a federal function. And last time I checked, organizing a coup, even if you're the chief of staff to the president, isn't part of your official job description.
Right, and the chief of staff isn't typically calling the Secretary of State of Georgia. As a non-lawyer, I can just state that as a person who's worked in politics. Andrew, I wanted to ask you about one of the subtle changes I noticed, but again, I'm not a lawyer, in Trump's tone, where he basically said, he went from saying the election is rigged to I thought the election was rigged. He also changed legal representation. What do you read into that, and does it mean anything?
Sure. So good pickup on that. I do think that if you're his lawyer, you do want to switch to an argument that this is what he believed. He believed at the time that the election was rigged, but that he's not saying, and it's not necessary for him to prove that in fact it was. In other words, he could have been mistaken. I don't think that's going to fly. I mean, it's way, way, way too late in the day. I mean, this is since you can introduce all of his statements, one of the questions the jury would have is, I'm sorry, why now? After all this time, is there evidence that suddenly came out yesterday that changed your mind? So I understand why the lawyer might want to do that, but I don't think that's going to work. If you were going to make that argument, you needed to do it a long time ago. And then why counsel changed, that's, no one knows for sure. Obviously, it could be a question of money because Donald Trump has a history of not paying for his counsel. But I think it also could be if Donald Trump felt like he wasn't sufficiently controlling his counsel. And, one of the things that everyone pointed out that were the bail conditions and that Donald Trump's were very different. I personally think that his previous lawyer, was right not to challenge that and to accept Fani Willis's sort of ultimatum that these are the criteria, because the downside for the lawyer was that you'd have a hearing and there would be issues and it would be presented to the court. That's something you would really not want to do if you were representing Donald Trump, have it laid out all of the ways in which he had harassed various witnesses, judges, prosecutors, et cetera. So I think we'll see. I mean, I think the new lawyer is good, but it's odd to change lawyers so late in the day.
So, Neil, not to leave out a major hearing or major development that we could learn tomorrow, which is the date of the trial for the case against Trump and overturning the election. What are you expecting? What are you watching for as we look to hear more from that tomorrow?
So this is the big enchilada. Tomorrow, Judge Chutkan in D.C. is going to set the date for Donald Trump's federal January 6th trial. The prosecutors have asked, as I said, for January 2nd of 2024. Donald Trump's lawyers literally filed a motion saying 2026. Right? Okay. I'm sorry. That is laughable. It's not credible. And I think Judge Chutkan is going to have none of it tomorrow. And in particular, what Jack Smith points out is the request for April 2026 was based on totally cooked data. They basically said, well, RICO prosecutions take this long, but they only looked at the COVID era. So they included all the delays, involving quarantine and the like. It is not a credible motion. And it made even harder, as Andrew just pointed out a moment ago, by Donald Trump repeatedly violating the conditions of, basically pretrial silence and trying to poison the jury pool. And what Judge Chutkan's already said is, look, you do that, I'm going to move the trial up. So I suspect that this trial is going to happen on or about the prosecutor's request of January 2024, as the American public deserve.
A lot. Everybody better eat their Wheaties and drink their, spinach smoothie tomorrow. Neil Katyal, Andrew Weissmann, thank you as always.